Okay, so John chapter 6, beginning at verse 16, a very familiar event in the life of Jesus with his disciples. When evening came, the disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only one boat had been there, and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but they had gone away alone. Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got in the boats and went back to Capernaum in search of Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth, you're looking for me, not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life." We went a little further than we're actually going today, but that's the reading this morning. You ever been in a storm? I remember when Holly and I when I was in seminary and Holly was there with me in Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. We had some tornadoes come through. The sirens that they have would just deafen you. And one night, they blew and they blew and they blew, and we got into the inner little cubicle that they called the office for seminary students because it was all inside walls, and we were scared to death. I was anyway. I didn't tell Holly that, but I was scared to death. Fortunately, the tornado went up over the seminary and landed just across the street from the seminary. It doesn't matter what kind of storm you're in; they're pretty terrifying. Even just anticipating the storms. Today, that's worse than the actual storm because we have all these these weather radar things that we're looking at, and it just causes us to say, "Oh no, we're going to get clobbered," and then nothing happens, or something does happen. But the anxiety prior to the storm is just as bad as going through the storm because of the technology that we have today. Fortunately for the disciples, they didn't have that, so they didn't know a storm was coming when they launched out that night. But there are sometimes storms that aren't related to the weather in our life. The inner struggles or the situations of life that test us or try us. I'm sure you're familiar with them. These other storms, they can be just as intense and as nerve-wracking as being in a weather storm. The only difference is that these weather storms are followed by disaster relief teams and all kinds of people coming in to help you. But when we have these other storms, for the most part, other than our friends and whatnot, we're going through the storm alone and the aftermaths of it alone. And here's the point. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you are a Christian or not. We will all go through times of trouble. There will be things that happen to us that we have no control over that will cause us trouble. There will be some things that we do have control of, and we cause the trouble ourselves to come our way. But we will all have difficulties, and Christians are not exempt from that. When we're going through the storm, sometimes everything we stand for or believe in can be tested. And we might as well admit it. No matter how great our faith in God is, there are times when we just don't sense Him in our life. We know He's there, but we don't feel Him. We don't see Him. We don't hear Him. We don't experience his presence. And if we aren't careful, the storms of life may take away our ability to experience God in our life or to see God in our life. And sometimes they may even cause us to believe that he doesn't care about what's going on in our life. A literal storm came upon the disciples that night. Jesus was nowhere to be found. The last time they were in a storm on the sea, remember where Jesus was? Where was he? He was sleeping. I bet they wish he were sleeping with them tonight, this night. But he wasn't. The winds were fierce. They were struggling to make any headway whatsoever. There was nothing they could do to calm the storm, and Jesus was still on the shore. We're not told that they wanted Jesus to be there, but I really believe they wish Jesus had been there during this struggle. For us as individuals, at least for me, sometimes it seems that no matter what you try to do, we just can't find God. And it doesn't matter what you do, the destruction of the storm continues in your life. And in the midst of the storms, it would appear that God is deaf to our cries for help. If I were one of the disciples that night, I know I would have been crying out, "Where are you, Jesus? Come, save us." I've already seen him calm the sea once when he was sleeping, and I sure would be wishing that he was here this night. Where is he? Doesn't he know that we're not going to make it if he doesn't show up? This storm is too strong for us. And by the way, why didn't he come with us? Have you ever felt that way? Not knowing what God's up to, not knowing where he is. You know, you cry out, "God, where are you? Why does it not feel like you're helping in this situation?" David felt that way quite a bit. He would basically cry out, "Where are you, God? Why do you not hear me? Why do you not answer me? How long do I have to wait, Lord, for you to show up?" And it really does feel that way for us sometimes. But it's not the truth. It wasn't the truth for David, and it's not the truth for us. God sees everything. God knows everything. There is nowhere we can go that God is not already there. In Mark, as he wrote this event down for his gospel, he informs us that Jesus was actually watching the disciples all through the night. Mark chapter 6, verse 48. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he, Jesus, was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. How far had they rowed? 3 to 3.5 miles. That's a pretty far distance to be able to see someone struggling on the water, don't you think? Especially in the middle of the night, because it was, as my father-in-law would say, darker than a pocket out there. The only way you'd be able to see anyone is when the lightning would flash up. Jesus wasn't just looking at them as we look at them. He was miraculously present with them, and they didn't even know it. Isn't that a comforting thought? Amen. It's not comforting to know that we can see him during a storm. The most comforting thing is to know that he sees us during the storm, and he hasn't left us. There's a little story told about a boy who woke his parents in the middle of the night. He was afraid of the dark. Any of you been afraid of the dark in your life? You can admit it. I was afraid of the dark as a kid. None of you were? Okay. Well, this little boy was afraid of the dark, and he runs to his parents in the middle of the night. He wanted to get in bed with them. If you're a parent, you've experienced that probably. His dad said, "Son, go back to your bed. You are not alone in there. God is there with you." The little boy said, "I got an idea, Dad. Let's trade rooms. You go sleep in there with God, and I'll stay in here with Mom." Sometimes it doesn't matter what anyone tells us. We do not believe God is present. We don't sense his peace. And it doesn't matter whether your mom or dad or a pastor or a friend or whoever tells you, it's still hard to believe. In the midst of the storm, Jesus walked on the water to his disciples. Do you believe that? Listen, this is not just a book. This is not just a book of fairy tales. This is a book of true events in history. And this is an event where Jesus literally walked on the water. This book is our authority. If there's anything outside this book that doesn't agree with this book is right and the other is wrong. That's what we base our faith on. Jesus walked on the water that night. He came to his disciples. They were struck with fear. I would say that's pretty natural. To be out in the middle of the lake and someone comes walking up to the boat in the midst of the waves and the storm, the wind. I would be afraid too. They probably thought it was a ghost. But then they realized it was Jesus, and they invited him into the boat, and he got into the boat. And as soon as he got into the boat, calm. Not only calm, but they immediately reached the other side of the shore, to the other shore. Boom, there they were. What a relief. I do find it interesting that Jesus didn't prevent the storm in the first place. Don't you? I mean, Jesus allowed them to experience this storm. Whatever fear may have been welled up in them, whatever anxiety they had, whatever struggles they had, Jesus allowed them to experience it. Can I tell you, God never promised to take away the struggles of life. We've all experienced things that we wish God would have vanquished before they hit us. But as I said before, it doesn't matter who we are, times of struggle will come. And as a Christian, we should never, ever think that life is now going to be perfect because we know Jesus. It's just not the case. And in reality, if we know what God is up to, we wouldn't want that. Because you see, storms are God's blessing in disguise to us. In the storm, God shows his faithfulness and his power. Even if we don't see it in the storm, it will be revealed to us in time. His faithfulness and his power. And I can tell you from personal experience, seeing God in the storm is like no other encounter with God that you will ever have. Going through my experience over the past several years, I came to the realization that I used to think I trusted God. But it was only as I was in the storm, and it was only as there was no one else to trust but God, that God proved himself trustworthy. God proved himself faithful. God proved himself loving and compassionate. It was a horrible storm, but I'm glad we went through it because my God is much dearer to me now than ever before. Think about this day the disciples had. What a faith-building day. 5,000, at least 5,000, probably closer to 10,000 people fed with 5 loaves and 2 fish. I always get it mixed up. 5 fish and 2 loaves. But here we go. A very little bit of food. Do you think their faith was now stronger in Jesus for having witnessed these 2 miracles? Absolutely. They went through the storm. They saw Jesus provide the food. Without it, their faith would have remained the same. Without the struggles of life, our faith would stay the same most of the time. It's only as we're stretched and as we're caused to trust Him that our faith grows. Everyone goes through those times. And then there are other times as we're going through them, we may even question if God exists. I think that one way to look at faith is to see it as the awareness of God. Faith is the awareness of God. Faith says, God is with me. I know He's here. Faith is knowing God is present even though you don't know it in such a way that you can scientifically prove it. That is faith, knowing He is here, His awareness with me. And if I know that God is with me, I can face whatever life brings my way because He can walk on water. But that awareness of God, it can fade. You ever had it fade? You ever been high with the Lord and then boom, you're low again? High with the Lord, He can do everything. He can see me through. He'll provide all of my needs. And then, oh my goodness, where is this going to come from? You ever been there? It has to be fed every day. Every single day we need to be on our knees before the Lord in humble submission to Him, acknowledging all His goodness to us, obedience to His word, whatever He tells us to do. In telling about those 5,000 people being fed by Jesus and about Jesus walking on the water, I believe it's very clear that John is telling us, focus your attention on Jesus. Let Jesus be the one that we see in life. Faith is the awareness of His presence in our life. He wants us to understand who Jesus is and how powerful He is in our lives. He wants us to see this one we call Jesus. He is much, much more than just a prophet. He is God in flesh. God come to us. No matter what our need, He can and will meet it. No matter what the storm may be in our life, whether from within or from without, He'll see us through. But John does something he does it quite a bit. He leaves part of the story out. What does he leave out of the story that Matthew includes? Do you have any clue? Peter. What did Peter do this night? Yeah. Jesus identified Himself to the disciples. Peter said, Lord, if it's you, Lord, I'm still sort of not sure, but if it's you, Lord, tell me to come to you on the water. If it is really you, Jesus, Peter knew with no doubt, if it was Jesus, He'd walk on the water. Peter knew the power of God. He'd already witnessed it. He was in the boat when Jesus calmed the sea. He was with Jesus when the woman with the flow of blood touched the hem of His garment and she was instantly healed. He was with Jesus when He raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. He was with Jesus when He cast the demons out of the man into a herd of pigs. He was with Jesus when Jesus fed the 5,000. Peter knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if this was Jesus and Jesus was calling him to come on the water, Jesus could and would make him able to do it. Do you believe that? If Jesus is calling you to do something, do you believe He will make you able? Absolutely. Jesus said to Peter, come. And at that moment, Peter did something that most of us do not do. He got out of the boat. That's the hardest part of faith. Stepping into or onto the water. It's never easy to take that first step when God calls us to do something. But Peter stepped out of the boat, and Peter was walking on the water. He literally was, just like Jesus. Peter was expressing his faith by stepping out of the boat. Faith always produces action. James says, "What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds?" Don't tell me you have faith if your faith doesn't move you to do something. Jesus told Peter, "Come." Peter stepped out and he went. He was walking on the water. He had his feet firmly planted on the water. And then what did he do? He looked around. He saw the storm. He saw the waves. He saw the wind. And he said, "I can't do this." And he began to sink. He took his eyes off of Jesus and looked at the storm. Oh my. Doesn't that happen to us? It will happen to us as a church. You better bet, you just believe me, when God really, we're experiencing his mercy drops around us right now. But the showers are coming, and when they come, we are going to be tested. Do we really have faith in God? Will we step out of the boat? And even when we're out of the boat, in the midst of it, will we continue to have our focus on Jesus so that Jesus gets all the glory and honor? Because what we're doing, we definitely cannot do. Only God can do it. Peter took his eyes off of Jesus and he began to sink. When the storms come our way, our focus will determine whether we sink or swim. Or maybe I should say whether we sink or walk. In order to make it through the storms of life and come out closer to the Lord, with our faith strengthened, we must keep our focus on the Lord. That doesn't mean he's going to take away the storm. It doesn't mean he's going to take away all your troubles, but he is going to walk with you through those troubles. I find it comforting to know that even though Peter doubted, what did Jesus do? He didn't say, "Oh, you wretched man, go ahead, sink." He didn't say that, did he? Reached out his hand. How much time does it, this is an amazing story to me, and this is nothing to do with the sermon, but how long does it take a person to sink? It says he began to sink. I don't know. Just think about that. Our faith in Jesus enables us to face life or meet death, not because we can see, but with the certainty that we are seen. Not that we have all the answers, but that we are known by the one who does. In these two events in Jesus' life, the feeding of the crowd and walking on the water, John gives to us the image of our Savior, one who is mighty with power, one who is filled with compassion and overflowing with love. And in doing so, he teaches us that we can depend upon him and we can trust him. Walking on the water was great, but Jesus did something much more difficult. And he did it all because of his love and compassion for us. Christ died on the cross, and he rose from the dead on the third day. Why did he do that? Well, like most storms in our life, we have no ability to solve the problem. We're all sinners. And in order to be in relationship with God, we must be righteous, without sin. Therefore, in and of ourselves, we cannot be in relationship with God because we have sinned. It doesn't matter if you're living a pretty good life right now. You've sinned. Sometime in your life, you sinned. And if you've sinned just one time, which isn't true, we've all sinned a gazillion times. But if you had only sinned one time, you're still a sinner. You're not perfect anymore. God requires perfection, righteousness. Jesus became a man while remaining fully God. He had every ability to sin that we do, every temptation to sin that we do, and yet he lived a sinless life. And then he died a death he didn't deserve because he had not sinned. And because he had not sinned, his death was not the punishment for his sin because he had no sin. His death became the punishment for our sin. He who knew no sin became sin that we might become the righteousness of God. He lived a perfect life for us because we're not righteous. He died an undeserved death because in order for us to pay the punishment for our sin ourselves, we must die. And here's the thing, you can't die and still have life. Jesus died to pay our penalty, that we don't have to pay that penalty so that we might live. You see, when we place our faith in Jesus, when we just say to Jesus, I believe your life was for me, I believe your death was for me, all we're saying is, I can't do it. I don't have the ability to save myself. I must have a Savior. He did the impossible for us. So when we receive him, God credits Jesus' life to us, and God takes Jesus' death as payment for our sin. And then we simply love him back. That's what being a Christian is. Loving the Lord back. Total commitment of love. It's hard to believe, but that is the truth, and that is the gospel. And if you're here today and you're still in that storm of sin and death, Jesus is here to bring calm to your storm. He is here to bring you into relationship with you. He is here to bring you into life as it was meant to be. Charles Spurgeon, do you guys know Charles Spurgeon? He was a famous English preacher way back. He said, when you can't trace his hand, you can trust his heart. When you can't see him, you can trust him. Babby Mason, she took those words and included them in a song. God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when you don't see his plan, when you can't trace his hand, trust his heart. In the storms of life, most of the time, we can't trace his hand. We don't know what he's up to, but we can trust his heart. God is always for us. He's always got our best at heart, even if it means taking us through some tough times to get us out of bad habits or whatever it is, sin in our life. It's always for our best, always for our best. He is not unkind. Whatever your storm may be today, my prayer is that you will trust in him. My prayer is that we will all turn our eyes upon Jesus.